Hey, ghost boy, where's your color? Yeah, you're so pale! Like a little cloud!
Stop!
Aw, is the ghost sad? Go back to the shadows!
Listen, come closer. Let me tell you a story about a boy everyone mocked and rained insults on. Not knowing that a day will come when they will beg him to save their lives. The water came fast. Too fast. It swallowed the road first, then the gardens, then the front steps of every house on the street. People were screaming. Children were crying. Old men were standing on chairs, holding their grandchildren above their heads. And in the middle of all that fear, all that noise, all that rushing brown water, one small boy was standing on a rock, completely calm, pointing toward the hill and shouting directions. His name was Daniel. But most people in the village called him other things. Ghost skin. Chalk boy. Weird one. He was 12 years old, with pale white skin, pink eyes that blinked carefully in bright light, and soft white hair that the wind tossed like dry grass. He was albino, different from everyone else in his village, and they had never let him forget it. But on this day, none of that mattered. On this day, Daniel was the only person in the whole village who knew where the flood was coming from, how high the water would rise, and exactly which path would save everyone's lives. While mothers grabbed their babies and fathers grabbed their goats, Daniel grabbed nothing. He had already prepared. He had been preparing for weeks. Because he had seen this coming long before anyone else even looked at the sky. This is the story of how a boy who was laughed at became a boy who saved lives. It is a story of pain, of patience, and of a quiet kind of power that the world often misses, because the world is too busy laughing at what it does not understand. Before we begin, if you love powerful stories that teach real-life lessons, hit that subscribe button right now, because this one will stay with you. Daniel had lived in that village his whole life, but he had never truly belonged there. From the day he was old enough to walk to school alone, the other children would cross to the other side of the road when they saw him coming. They did not hate him exactly. They were just afraid of what they did not understand. And in that village, fear almost always turned into cruelty. The worst one was a boy named Marcus. He was tall, loud, and always surrounded by other children who wanted to make him laugh. Every morning on the way to school, Marcus would cup his hands around his mouth and shout across the road, "Ghost boy is coming. Everyone cover your eyes or you'll turn pale too." And the other children would laugh and scatter, even the ones who, deep inside, felt a small sting of shame for doing it. Some of them had played with Daniel when they were very little, before they learned from their older brothers and sisters that they were not supposed to. Now they pretended not to know him at all. Daniel's mother, Mama Grace, was a strong woman with big hands and a soft voice. Every evening, she would sit with Daniel on their small porch and speak quietly while the sun went down. "My son," she would say, "God made you different because He needed something different done in this world. You are not strange. You are special. And one day, everyone will see it." Daniel would nod and lean against her arm. But some nights, he lay in bed staring at the ceiling, wondering why being special had to feel so much like being alone. His father had left when he was 4. Some people in the village said it was because the man was ashamed to have a son who looked the way Daniel looked. Others said it was something else. Nobody knew for certain. But Daniel grew up with the absence sitting inside him like a stone that never dissolved, and instead of letting it crush him, he did something quiet and powerful with it. He turned his loneliness into curiosity. He turned his empty hours into something that would one day matter more than anyone in that village could have imagined. While the other boys played football in the field after school, Daniel would climb the old mango tree at the edge of the village and sit very still, watching. He watched the river. He watched the sky. He watched the way the birds flew, which direction, how high, how fast. He watched the color of the clouds at sunrise and the smell of the air just before rain. He kept a small notebook tucked inside his shirt, filled with tiny handwriting and little drawings, cloud shapes, water level marks he had scratched onto the wooden fence post by the river, dates and times and patterns that only he had noticed. One afternoon, the school teacher, old Mr. Tobias, caught him sitting under the classroom window during break time, reading a book about weather patterns and river systems. He frowned at first, then leaned down and looked at the pages. "Where did you get this book?" he asked. "The library in town," Daniel said quietly. "My mother took me on Saturday." Mr. Tobias was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "You know, the great scientists of the world started exactly like this. Watching. Recording. Wondering." It was the kindest thing any person outside his family had ever said to Daniel. "Daniel," Mr. Tobias said slowly, "what do you think you will do with all of this watching?" Daniel looked up at him with his pink eyes, calm and serious. "I think I will know things before other people know them," he said. "And then I will tell them. And they will be safe." Mr. Tobias smiled a strange, slow smile. "I believe you," he said. He did not know that Daniel had already been noticing something. Something small, something quiet, something that made the stone in his chest feel different, not heavy anymore, but sharp. Alert. For the past 3 weeks, Daniel had been watching the river behind the village change. The water was rising. Slowly, barely noticeably, but to Daniel, who had been measuring it every single morning with a stick he pressed into the mud at the same spot, the change was undeniable. And the clouds to the north were growing darker, heavier, and lower each day. He had read about this in one of his books. He knew what it meant. And it frightened him more than Marcus and all his friends combined. It was a Tuesday morning when Daniel finally decided he had to speak. He had measured the river again at dawn, and the water had risen 3 full finger widths overnight. In his notebook, the numbers were clear and frightening. He had drawn a careful diagram the night before, showing how the low ground behind the village sat below the level of the hills to the north, and how, if the northern stream broke its banks and met with the swelling river below, the water would funnel directly into the village like water poured into a cup. He had written it all out in careful words and brought the notebook with him. He went first to Mr. Thomas, the village head. The man was sitting outside his house drinking tea when Daniel walked up, notebook in hand. Daniel explained everything slowly and clearly, pointing to his diagrams, showing him the measurements, explaining the cloud patterns and the bird behavior. Mr. Thomas listened for about 2 minutes. Then he waved his hand the way you wave away a fly. "Little boy," he said, not unkindly but firmly, "go home. Leave the weather to the weathermen and the rivers to the water board. You are 12 years old." "But sir," Daniel said, "the water board has not been to this village in 4 months. And the patterns I have recorded." "Go home," Mr. Thomas said again. And this time, he was not even looking at Daniel anymore. He tried Mrs. Edeora, who ran the market. He tried the church elder, Pastor Emmanuel. He even tried showing his findings to Marcus's father, who was head of the community development group. Each time, the reaction was the same, polite at first, then dismissive, then slightly embarrassed, the way adults get when a child makes them feel like they should know something they don't. And some of them, Daniel could see it clearly in their eyes, dismissed him not just because he was young, but because of who he was. The ghost boy. The pale one. The weird one. What could he possibly know? That night, Daniel sat at the kitchen table while Mama Grace cooked. The rain had started outside, gentle at first, just a soft tapping on the tin roof. Daniel had his notebook open and was drawing one last diagram, his hand moving quickly and surely across the page. Mama Grace watched him from the corner of her eye, stirring the pot but saying nothing. She knew that look on her son's face. It was the look of someone who has tried everything the right way and is now deciding if there is another way. "They didn't listen," she said quietly. "No," Daniel said. "What will you do?" Daniel looked up. I will prepare. And when the water comes, I will be ready to help whoever I can. Mama Grace put down her spoon. She crossed the small kitchen and placed both her large, warm hands on her son's thin shoulders. Then we prepare together, she said. They walked through the night. Daniel had already thought everything through. He knew where the water would enter, from the low gap between the old school fence and the storage shed. He knew which houses sat lowest and would flood first. He knew the safest path to high ground, the old footpath behind the church that nobody used anymore because it was overgrown and slightly steep. He drew a clear map on a large sheet of paper and showed his mother every step. Then they gathered what they could: ropes, a lantern, dry matches, a first aid kit that Mama Grace kept under the bed, and 2 thick blankets folded into a waterproof bag. Outside, the rain grew heavier. The soft tapping became a drumming. And somewhere far off, deeper and lower than the rain, there was another sound, a sound like the earth breathing out slowly. A rumble. Low and distant, but real. Daniel pressed his ear to the wall and listened. His pink eyes were wide and completely still. The stone that had lived in his chest for so many years was gone now. In its place was something else entirely. Something bright and certain and completely unafraid. If you're still watching, it means this story is touching you. Go ahead and subscribe, you don't want to miss stories like this every week. The flood did not come gently. It did not creep in like a shy visitor. It came crashing, roaring, surging, a brown wall of angry water that broke through the low gap between the school fence and the storage shed at 4:37 in the morning, exactly as Daniel had drawn it in his diagram. It knocked down the fence, rushed through the gap, and swallowed the lower end of the village in under 3 minutes. People woke up to water at their bedroom doors. People woke up to the sound of their furniture being shoved across the floor by a current they could not see. Children screamed. Dogs howled. Old Mama Cecilia next door was found standing on her kitchen table holding her Bible above her head, crying out to God at the top of her lungs. Daniel and his mother were already outside. Already dressed. Already standing at the top of the old footpath behind the church, lantern lit, rope tied securely to the old fig tree, voices cutting through the dark and the rain. This way. The path is here. Follow the light. This way to high ground. People heard the voice and came running, stumbling, soaked, terrified, carrying babies and bundles and whatever their hands had grabbed in the darkness. They followed the light without knowing whose voice it was. They just followed it because it was steady and calm and sure, and everything else in the world right now was chaos. Marcus came running with his mother and 2 younger sisters, water already rising to his knees. He grabbed the rope without looking at who was holding the other end. He pulled himself up the steep path, turned back to pull his mother, reached down for his sisters. It was only when he reached the top of the hill and a crack of lightning split the sky that he saw the lantern clearly. And the pale hand holding it. And the pink eyes behind it, calm as a cloudless morning, steady as a rock in the middle of a raging storm. Marcus opened his mouth. He closed it. He opened it again. Daniel, he whispered. Daniel handed him the rope without ceremony. Hold this, he said simply. There are more people coming. For the next 4 hours, Daniel directed the rescue with the focus of someone twice his age. He knew which families lived in the lowest houses. He told the men where to wait safely and where the current was too dangerous to cross. He remembered from his weeks of careful observation that the old culvert on the east side of the road would back up and create a second surge of water, and he warned them a full 20 minutes before it happened, giving everyone enough time to move 12 people out of that area before the second wave came crashing through. Nobody questioned him anymore. Nobody looked at his pink eyes with embarrassment or pity. They looked at him the way sailors look at a lighthouse in a storm, with pure, desperate, grateful relief. Mr. Tobias was there. He had a cut on his forehead from falling in the dark. When he reached the top of the path and saw Daniel standing there, his small pale figure lit by the lantern, map in one hand, rope in the other. The old teacher sat down right in the mud and covered his face with both hands. Not from sadness. From something deeper than sadness. The kind of feeling that comes when you finally understand something you should have understood a long, long time ago. When he looked up, his eyes were wet, and not from the rain. "I told you," Daniel said. Not with anger. Not with pride. Just with the quiet, even certainty of someone stating a simple fact. "I told you I would watch. And I would know. And I would tell people. And they would be safe." "Yes," said Mr. Tobias, his voice barely above a whisper. "You did tell us. You told all of us." Pastor Emmanuel was there. Mrs. Edeora was there. Mr. Thomas, the village head who had waved Daniel away like a fly just 3 days ago, was there too, shaking, soaked, alive, because of a boy he had refused to listen to. They all came up the path Daniel had found, holding the rope Daniel had tied, guided by the light Daniel had lit. Not one person was lost that night. Not one. When the sun finally rose, pale and washed and gentle, over a village half swallowed by brown water, 73 people were sitting on the hillside behind the church. Wet. Shaken. Alive. Every single one of them. When the water finally pulled back 2 days later, the village looked like it had been turned inside out. Furniture sat broken in the mud. Walls had crumbled. Gardens were completely destroyed. But the people, every single person, was alive. And now, in the strange quiet that follows a disaster, they had to face something harder than floodwater. They had to face themselves. They had to look at each other and remember who they had been to that boy, and what that boy had done for them anyway. Marcus came to Daniel's house on the 3rd morning. He stood at the door for a long time before he knocked. When Daniel opened it, Marcus looked at him, really looked at him, for what felt like the first time in his life. He was taller than Daniel. He had always been louder, always surrounded, always the one others followed. But standing at that door in the quiet morning light, he looked very small. Smaller than Daniel had ever looked, even on the worst days. "I was wrong," Marcus said. His voice cracked right in the middle of the word wrong, like it was something heavy that caused him to carry out of his mouth. "I was wrong about you. I was wrong about everything. And I'm sorry, Daniel. I am really, truly sorry." Daniel looked at him for a long, still moment. Then he stepped back from the door. "Come in," he said quietly. "My mother made tea." The apologies came slowly over the following days, some better than others, some clumsy and too late, some that came with tears and some that came with silence. But they came. Mr. Thomas stood up at the community gathering and said publicly, in front of everyone, that a child, a young boy whom they had all failed to listen to, had saved every life in that village. Mrs. Edeora brought food to Mama Grace's house 3 days in a row. The church put up a small notice board, and right at the center of it, framed carefully, was Daniel's flood diagram. Underneath it, someone had written 4 words in bold letters: "He warned us. We should have listened." 3 weeks after the flood, while the village was still being rebuilt plank by plank and brick by brick, Mr. Tobias asked Daniel to come with him to the district education office in town. He had written a long letter, 6 full pages, describing what Daniel had done, what he had observed, how he had prepared, and what the village would look like today if he had not been the kind of boy who climbed trees and watched the world. The education officer read the letter in complete silence. Then she looked up at Daniel over the top of her reading glasses with an expression he had never seen an adult wear when looking at him before. It was respect. "Young man," the officer said slowly, "do you know what a hydrology scholarship is?" Daniel shook his head. "It is a scholarship to study water. Rivers. Floods. The science of how water moves through the earth." She smiled. "There is one offered by the National University every 2 years. The next one opens in 3 months. I think you should apply. In fact, she looked at Mr. Tobias with firm eyes. I think we should make sure he does. Daniel went home that evening and sat on the porch with his mother, the same porch where Mama Grace had always whispered that he was special, that God had made him different for a reason. The sun was going down, turning the sky orange and pink and deep blue all at once. Daniel had his notebook open on his lap, but he was not writing. He was just watching. Watching the way the light moved slowly across the clouds. Watching the birds settle into the trees for the night. Watching the color of the horizon, where tomorrow was already quietly beginning. But here is the twist. The twist that nobody knew, not even Mama Grace, until 3 weeks later, when the floodwater had fully pulled back from the eastern edge of the village and left something behind in the mud. Something strange. The men who were clearing the debris found it half buried beneath what used to be the riverbank, an old tin box, sealed shut with rust and age and time. When they finally pried it open, they found inside it a collection of papers. Old, faded, water-damaged at the edges, but still readable. They were handwritten records. Careful, detailed, scientific records of the river's patterns going back more than 40 years. Records kept by someone who had watched the same river, measured the same water levels, drawn the same kinds of diagrams, in the same careful, patient handwriting. At the very bottom of the stack of papers was a single photograph. A young boy, pale-skinned, with soft white hair and calm, light-colored eyes. Looking straight into the camera with an expression that was quiet and serious and completely unafraid. On the back of the photograph, in faded ink, were a name and a date. The name was Samuel. The date was 43 years ago. And underneath the name, in that same careful handwriting, were 5 small words. They never listened to me either. Daniel held the photograph for a very long time. The village was quiet around him. The evening birds were singing. Somewhere behind him, he could hear his mother humming in the kitchen. He pressed the photograph gently against his chest, closed his eyes, and breathed. For the first time in his entire life, he did not feel alone in the world. He felt like a link in a long, unbreakable chain. Like a river that had finally, after years of winding through hard ground, reached the open sea. The world had mocked Samuel. The world had mocked Daniel. And both of them, quietly, patiently, without hatred in their hearts, had saved the world anyway. Some people are born to be seen. And some people are born to see. The wise world learns, eventually, to tell the difference. If this story moved you, subscribe for more powerful stories like this. And remember, never laugh at someone's difference.